today we have Miguel Borrella from Navarra, and in a very short parenthesis, Miguel and I met years ago at Alicante, and ever since he's made a long journey which took him all the way from Alicante to Navarra. And today he's going to present very interesting work, both theoretical and empirical, if I got it correctly, on somewhat empirical I/O, if I got it right. The floor is over to you. You have about an hour. Ideally, we'll be over by 14:10, 10:30. I'll flag it when there's 10 minutes to go, and the usual convention is questions on the go, and we'll even complete up to you.
Perfect.
Hand over to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity of giving my first webinar in my life. So let's see how it goes. Today I'm going to present a new paper that we have been working in the last 6 months in the lockdown, basically, with my colleague Raúl Bajo, who may also be here at some point because we had another seminar here in Pamplona and it's finishing, but she should join at some point. And the title is Heterogeneous Task Pass-Through under Different Vertical Relationships. And as Marcelo told you, is a work with all the theoretical and also empirical. So let me go directly to the introduction. So taxes are widely used to raise the revenue for necessary government functions, such as the redistribute wealth or modify agents' decision by affecting prices. They are particularly favored when governments aim to reduce the consumption of some goods that exert negative externalities, like, for example, climate change or traffic congestion or healthcare costs. So understanding the pass-through of taxes to prices has become a central concern for policymakers, given the wide-ranging economic implications of these fundamental goals of taxations. And this concern has resulted in a growing literature on the estimation of the incidence of taxes in different contexts. But much of this existing literature on the pass-through, sorry, because I'm in the other computer, on the pass-through focuses on the role of competition and, in particular, the presence or absence of horizontal market concentration. The general consensus in the literature is that in the case of imperfectly competitive markets, the more horizontally concentrated the market is, the greater the tax pass-through. Indeed, for the case of perfectly competitive markets, the economic theory predicts that taxes are fully passed to consumers. This result has been tested in different industries, like, for example, the alcohol industry, the fuel industry, or the cigarette one. However, this extensive literature on the influence of the horizontal market structure on the pass-through of taxes stands in stark contrast to the absence of studies on the role played by the vertical market structure. So, why might the vertical?
One quick qualification. Can you define horizontal concentration?
Horizontal concentration is basically when there's two firms are, like, for example, a fusion in banks.
Merge.
A merge, yeah. And vertical is when two firms provides different services at different degrees.
Okay, client supplier. So I can read them as in standard I/O, vertical horizontal integration in a way.
Exactly. Okay, so why might the vertical market structure affect the tax pass-through? So, first of all, a long-standing literature has documented the implications of the vertical market structure for consumer prices, for firm profits and market efficiency. And these implications are the result of the so-called double marginalization problem. If there is a market power upstream, for example, at the producer level or the wholesaler, and downstream at the retail level, firms at each of these stages charge their own markup. This results in a different market price and also a different quantity served than that obtained if the upstream and the downstream firms vertically integrate, which basically eliminates one of the markups charged. The difference in the final market prices that arise due to these different vertical market structures suggest that taxes will also have an heterogeneous impact on consumers and consequently on tax collection, depending on the degree of vertical integration that the firms have. Additionally,
one quick question about
yep.
double marginalization. What do we know about it? Isn't there a coordination issue for whether the markup is conventionally used upstream or downstream?
Yep, and this is something that I'm going to discuss in the theoretical model.
Okay.
Let me focus on this question in the theoretical model. So additional facts. Why do we care about this? First of all, because the potential disparate effect of any tax policy depending on the vertical structure, with consequences, for example, for revenue, for wealth distribution, or for agents' behaviors. And this is important given the increasing number of industries dominated by large global firms which enters the local retail markets using different vertical structures, ranging from full integration to complete independence. Then, understanding how these different relationships affect the pass-through of taxes is key to predict the effect of some policies implemented either at the national or the regional level, such as, for example, taxes on plastic cups that affect coffee stores, the sugary soft drink taxes, or the so-called fast fashion tax recently proposed in the UK, to name a few. So in this paper, what we try to do is to fill this gap in the literature by exploring the novel question of the impact of the vertical market structure on the pass-through of taxes onto consumer prices. We do it by providing evidence of an heterogeneous effect, both using the theory and empirics. And we also, at the end of the paper, we discuss some policy and in particular some budgetary implications of our results. So quickly in the theoretical context, we use a successive price-setting monopolies framework, and I will discuss in a bit how this develops. And in the empirical context, we use the retail fuel market in northern Spain. In particular, we use a confidential data set on vertical arrangements between a major oil refiner, the wholesaler, and all the gas stations, the retailers that operate under such a refiner's brand in 8 provinces in Spain, together with data on fuel prices and gas station characteristics. It's important here to remark that we have access only to this confidential data is only to one particular brand that, of course, given that it's confidential, I cannot tell you. And that from the point of view of the consumer, whenever you go to any gas station, you don't know whether this particular gas station from this brand is vertically integrated or not. You go there and you see the brand, basically. Then this unique data set allows us to study the differential impact of any tax reform, of this tax reform implemented in January 2016 by newly and unexpected elected left-wing coalition regional governments. This context allows us to provide the opportunity to exploit an exogenous shock to identify the desired effect. If I will try to convince you that this is exactly the case. So at the theoretical level, and to motivate our empirical analysis, we provide a simple model of a price-setting retailer in the presence of a per-unit tax. In particular, we first set up and solve a successive monopolies framework both for the wholesaler and for the retailer using backward induction. And we also set up and solve the vertically integrated optimal pricing problem, comparing in both cases the results with this presence of a per-unit tax sold to consumers. Our main theoretical prediction says that the pass-through is unambiguously larger if firms are vertically integrated compared to the case in which both firms are vertically independent or independent entities. The result is directly linked to the double marginalization problem because the tax negatively affects just the retailer's markup if both firms are vertically integrated, or basically there is only one firm vertically integrated, but it also affects the wholesaler markup if they are vertically independent. At the empirical level, we use a generalized difference in difference strategy with gas station and time fixed effects, weak time fixed effects. And basically what we do is a pre-post comparison between gas stations affected by the tax reform and gas stations that are not affected, considering also the differences that arise between those owned by the refiner, those that are vertically integrated, and those independent of it. Consistently with the theory, we find a pass-through rate of about 99.7% of the tax for vertically integrated gas stations. And this number goes down to a 73.6% for vertically independent gas stations. These figures are consistent with previous studies, which find the pass-through of tax rates of an increase in fuel taxes ranging from about 75 to 100%. So our study clarifies that taking into account that the vertical relationship is a plausible explanation to reconcile these findings. This pattern is remarkably stable across various model specifications, type of fuels, and a wide variety of robustness checks. And in particular, I would like to focus on the propensity score matching estimation, which corrects for a potential selection effect bias, as the refiner owns a certain particular subset of gas stations, for instance, all those located on toll roads, that may increase prices to a greater extent following the tax hike. Finally, we use our estimates to study the impact of a tax change on the government revenue under different counterfactual market scenarios. In particular, for this tax reform, our back-of-the-envelope calculations indicate a decrease in the annual tax rate from fuel sales in these 4 Spanish provinces of about 0.1 million euro if all the gas stations were vertically integrated, compared to the case in which all were vertically independent. These impacts of the different vertical restraints on the revenue rates was overlooked by previous authors that studied these consequences of divorcement regulations, and we will talk a bit more at the end of the presentations about how we do this back-of-the-envelope calculations. Finally, to finish the introduction, basically with the previous literature, many papers have focused on the impact of the horizontal structure of the tax pass-through, but there are no papers on the impact of the vertical structure on this tax pass-through. To the best of our knowledge, there is only one exception, Rosema in 2018. In this study, the author focuses on the supply side to check how the burden of a tax is shared between the upstream and the downstream firm. But by the contrast, we focus on the demand side to study the impact of a tax on consumer prices, considering different vertical structures. There are also other papers studying the transmission of shocks throughout the supply chains to final prices. And for instance, Bonnet et al. 2013 and Hon and Lee in 2017 focus on the commodity price shocks, while Yoshida in 1998 and Herrstein and Villas-Boas in 2010 focus on the exchange rate shocks. Importantly for us, in all the cases, including our paper, these authors find that double marginalization also plays a key role in explaining this transmission of shocks across different vertical market structures. Okay, so we move to the theoretical framework. One clarification here, I'm the empiric guy, as Marcelo knows very well. So this model was developed almost 100% by Raul, but I will try to do my best to explain in an easy way. So what is the plan that we have here in the theoretical model? So we are going to solve the first optimum pricing, a profit maximization problem, based on previous models of price settings firms with market power. Basically, the first one was by Chamberlain in 1933, and there are some recent or not so recent development by Friedman in 1977 and Vives in 2001. This is the standard setup in the literature on gasoline markets, as for example, Slade in 1998 or Noel in 2028 doing their papers. We are going to consider 2 different cases. We are going to have a successive monopoly case with a wholesaler and retailer, which builds on the classic framework by Spengler 1950. And we are also consider another case in which we have a vertically integrated monopoly And in both cases, what we are going to do is to extend the framework by introducing a per unit specific task, as done by Anderson et al. In 2001, comparing in both cases the impact of the tax on the price, that on the final price charged to consumers. So let me go to the successive monopolies case. We are going to consider an upstream firm, also called a wholesaler, that produces an intermediate good at cost C. Then this firm sells to the downstream firm at price W, and the retailer or the downstream firm transforms this intermediate good with no cost and sells to the consumers at price P. For the sake of simplicity, we assume that the downstream firms has no transformation cost, but in our theoretical expressions are robust to assuming instead a strictly positive marginal transformation cost. We need some additional notations, so we are going to define the demand of the final good dP, and this demand function is strictly decreasing and concave, although we show in our appendix that the concavity assumption can be relaxed without problems, and it's also an isoelastic demand function. Also, this assumption is also relaxed in the appendix. Finally, we are going to introduce a specific task, a per unit sold to consumers, tau greater than 0, and we focus on the case of a per unit task to be consistent with our empirical application. Then we are going to solve each of these monopolies problems by backward induction. So consider first the retailer's profit maximization problem, in which the retailer wants to choose P in order to maximize profits. This is the standard equation, and at an interior solution, the optimal price is characterized by the following first order condition, while we assume that the corresponding second order is also satisfied. This equation, the first order condition, characterizes the retailer's optimal price P star given W and tau. And by the implicit function theorem, we can express this function as a function of these two variables, as the price charged by the wholesaler and the tax. Moreover, applying this implicit partial differentiation, we can show that the retailer's optimal price increases both in the price charged by the wholesaler W and also in the tax tau. Then we focus on the upstream firm, taking as given, or sorry, we use this P star WD, and we define the retailer's demand for the intermediate good as dR for the sake of simplicity. And then applying the chain rule, it is straightforward to show that this function decreases both in the price charged by the wholesaler and also in the tax tau. What matters here is the second result in lemma 2, because it is central for our analysis. It implies that an increase in the tax not only reduces the consumer's demands for the final good, because the price is higher, given lemma 1, but also reduces the retailer's demand for the intermediate good. This in turn implies that a change in the tax that also affects the wholesaler's profit maximization price choice. And as a spoiler, this will not happen when the firm is vertically integrated, as we will see in 2 slides. Then, bearing in mind the previous information, we solve the wholesaler profit maximization problem, and basically we do exactly the same. We are going to choose the price of the intermediate good to maximize the problem. As an interior solution, the wholesaler optimal price is given by the following first order condition that also satisfies the second order conditions. This equation characterizes the wholesaler optimal price, denoted by W star, given the cost C and the tax. And again, using the implicit function theorem, this price can be expressed as a function of these two variables, the cost and the tax. And by further implicitly differentiating, we can show that it decreases in tau. This is the case for the monopoly with 2 firms. Now we focus on the vertically integrated monopoly. We have the same market environment, but now the wholesaler and the retailer are vertically integrated. We have an upstream division of the same firm producing the intermediate good, and a downstream division transforming this intermediate good and selling it to consumers. So we have, again, the vertically integrated firms profit maximization problems. We do exactly the same that with the two previous problems. And we can characterize with the first order condition the vertically integrated firm's optimal price that we call now P hat, that using the implicit function theory can also be expressed as a function of the cost and the tax. As explained by Spengler in 1950 and Buller and Gardner in 2013, the double marginalization implies that W star is greater than C. Therefore, ceteris paribus, a vertically integrated monopoly sells a greater quantity at a lower price than a retailer that buys the intermediate good from a monopolistic wholesaler. However, while the implications of the vertical relationship for quantities and prices are unambiguous and well understood, and they have been studied so far a lot of times, the implications for the pass-through of the tax to consumers is not. And this is exactly what we are going to do in the final part of the theoretical section, in which we are going to study the effect of this change in the per unit tax rate on retail prices. We are going to focus on the difference between the successive monopolies and the vertically integrated monopoly. And the main theoretical result of our paper, which is described in Proposition 1, is that the pass-through of an increase in the tax rate onto the consumer prices is unambiguously greater if the wholesaler and the retailer are vertically integrated compared to the case in which they are independent entities. This result holds for more general demand functions, and we have some simulation in another appendix, but let me focus on the intuition behind. Basically, following a tax hike, if firms are vertically independent, we have a positive direct effect on the price, because there is an increase in the retail price by lemma 1, but we also have a negative indirect effect on the price. And it's because the decrease in the retailer's demand for the intermediate goods that affects the decrease in the wholesaler price. When firms are vertically integrated, we have the first positive direct effect, but we don't have the second indirect effect. And this is because the vertically integrated firms, in the upstream division of the vertically integrated firms, does not modify or re-optimize the price charged to the downstream division, as a monopolistic wholesaler independent from the retailer would. And this is basically what we want to do in our, what we want to study in our empirical application. That this, if there are no further questions, I will move right now. Before going to the details of the empirics, let me focus on a bit on the institutional setting and the data, and in particular, a bit of the transportation fuel markets. There are two commonly observed features of transport fuel markets across countries. First of all, the wholesaler segment, so the refineries, basically are controlled by a few brands, or they have a lot of market power. And this market power has been, or the implications of this high market power have been documented in different contexts, like, for example, in the US, in Netherlands, or in Chile. Basically, the dominant position of refineries is more evident in countries whose market is served exclusively by a national oil company. In addition, we also have an heterogeneous vertical relationship between the refiner and the retailers, or between the refiner and the gas station. And I'm going to define in the next slide these heterogeneous relationships. In Spain, basically, we have the same environment. We have, first of all, that in the wholesale segment, we have only 3 companies, so we have a lot of market power. We have Repsol, Cepsa, and BP owning the 9 oil refineries operating in the country and controlling about the 60% of all the gas stations in Spain. And in this, for these 3 companies, we have that the vertical relationship is of 3 types. First of all, we can have a vertically integrated gas station, which is owned and operated by the refiner, a vertically independent gas station, which is owned and operated by an independent entrepreneur, or a leased dealer gas station, which basically is an hybrid between the other 2. Focusing a bit on this vertical relationship in the Spanish transportation fuel market, I'm going to spend a bit of time in defining what is what in terms of vertically integrated, vertically independent gas station. On the one hand, there are vertically integrated gas stations that are owned and managed by the refiner. In these ones, the refiner sets the retail price and pays a salary to its employees. And basically, the refinery is in charge of doing everything. Then we have the vertically independent gas stations that are owned and operated by the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur makes the most of gas stations' managerial decisions, also setting the price, with one exception, which is the merchandising or the logo decisions, which are taken by the refiner. This is basically similar to a franchise agreement. Then we have a leased dealer gas station, which is owned by the refiner, but leased to an entrepreneur. And then we have kind of a mix between the other two. This entrepreneur makes most of the gas station managerial decisions, also prices, but the refiner can make some retail price recommendations. So the refiner influences basically the retail price. In our main empirical part, we focus only on the case or studying the case between vertically integrated and vertically independent gas stations, and we leave the leased dealer analysis to the appendix. Basically, the spoiler here is that we observe a similar price behavior than the one with the vertically integrated due to these retail price recommendations.
Quick question.
Yep.
What is in the market the share of the three types of contracts? Which is the quantitatively?
In our,
that's it.
We don't know, because in general we don't know. As I told you, as a consumer, if you see, for example, one Cepsa or one Repsol or one BP, you don't know if this gas station, particular gas station, is vertically integrated, independent, or leased dealer. But in our case, and here I move to the data, we have access to 178 confidential contracts, from which 80 are independent gas stations and 98 are vertically integrated. And
I'm asking whether, so my point is, if I'm a referee, I would be interested in knowing to what extent your sample, which is very juicy in a way, is rich, I guess, it's not easy to obtain. So that's a plus. To what extent it is representative of the Spanish gas market or the European gas market? Why? Because the more representative it is, the more I learn from a small sample of the whole population.
Exactly, you're completely right. As far as we know, we don't have this information for any other brand. For this brand, the numbers are basically the same. The raw numbers are basically the same compared to the ones that we have. But we don't have information of other brands. So,
understand my point. Where I point to is there a literature review, a government report, some aggregated evidence that can lend a hand? It's not for this presentation, but
of course, sure.
If you put,
I'm writing to check after the presentation.
If you put your example, your sample in this case, in context, that buys you referee's confidence.
Perfect. Thank you. It's written. Okay, so in the data, so we have this unique data set combining the information from different sources. We have access to these 178 confidential contracts, basically specifying the relationship between this major Spanish refiner and all the gas stations operating under this brand. And we have access to gas stations located in Aragon, Navarra, País Vasco, and La Rioja. From our 178 contracts, we can identify 80 that are independent and 98 that are vertically integrated. Then this information is matched with a data set on daily fuel prices. And what we have here is that we have these daily prices for all the gas stations of this brand for the same 4 states. And we obtain this information from the website called Geoportal, which is controlled by the Spanish Ministry of Energy. And here, this is all the credit goes to Raul, because basically what he does all days is to download the Excel file with the price and several other characteristics of the gas stations for all the gas stations in Spain, because this Excel file is erased and replaced all days at midnight. And he has been doing this for the last, I think, 6 years. And he has forgotten only 2 days in these 6 years to download this Excel file. So we have basically almost every day. In our case, we focus on on a very short run period from July 1st, 2015 until June 30, 2016. So basically 6 months before and 6 months after the tax change. And we use weekly average values just to have a decent number of observations. What do we have additionally on our data set? We use, first of all, the number of nearby gas stations as a measure of intensity of competition. Basically, we have the location, the latitude and longitude of all gas stations, so we can calculate in a, for example, 2 kilometers radius how many gas stations there are, and this is what we include in our setting. We also use the wholesale price to control for the cost of for gas station, and we use the Brent crude oil price, although results are robust also using the Rotterdam price. Of course, we use the Spanish regional tax rate because it's exactly what we are going to exploit in our empirical analysis. Just to have an idea of what we do, with a very simple map. Here in Spain, I think it's not very necessary, but just to give an intuition, we have Aragon and Navarra, which are our affected provinces, and País Vasco and La Rioja, which are the not affected provinces. Our focus then is the change in the regional range of the excise fuel duty. In particular, we use the change in the affected provinces of Navarra and Aragon that changed the regional tax from 0 to 2.9 cents per liter after January 2016. And we are going to compare this change to the not affected provinces, which are the País Vasco and La Rioja, which basically set the regional tax rate equal to 0 in the whole period. Some issues to consider. First of all, the regional governments in these 2 states were previously dominated by right-wing parties. However, following the May 2015 elections, national state elections, new left-wing regional governments were unexpectedly formed in July 2015 in these states. And this was kind of a surprise because basically both the government did not win the elections, so the previously elected governments won the elections, but some strange coalitions were formed both in Aragon and in Navarra. And here, in particular in Navarra, I can confirm you that no one could see at that point in time that they were going to be that the region was going to be ruled by a coalition between. I think it was Bildu, Nafarroa Bai, Izquierda Unida, and Podemos. So something kind of a strange coalition. By the end of this year, as a part of the new political agenda, the newly elected governments increased this regional excise fuel tax, and this reform was publicly and unexpectedly announced the first week of November. So they constitute an exogenous shock that, after considering this potential anticipatory effect that may exist between the first week of November and the last week of December, allow us to study the differential effect of taxation on retail prices on both vertically integrated and independent firms. Finally, we also saw it in the appendix that the tax change is unlikely motivated by a change in the retail fuel markets conditions in these states. And here we can go very quick to this. We provide some local linear relations of the monthly diesel sales against time. And basically, we observe the same pattern in the 4 states, no matter whether they are affected or not, in the quantity of diesel sold at the state month level. Unfortunately, we don't have data on the quantity sold at the gas station level, and also at the so we don't have daily data. And so this is the best we can do with quantities, with quantity data. Okay. Before going to the main results or to the empirical part, we provide in the paper some preliminary graphical evidence of the effects of the tax regional tax reform. And in particular, we provide some local linear regressions of the difference in the log diesel price against time, distinguishing between three different things. First of all, between gas stations that are located in provinces affected and not affected by tax reform. Second thing, between vertically integrated and vertically independent gas stations, and this is done in panel A and B, and also before and after the tax announcement and the tax change. And these are the vertical dashed lines that we have in both panels. What we can observe in this graph is that we have, first of all, a small jump at the time of the announcement for vertically independent gas stations, and this is why we control for this in our regressions. And this small jump is not there for vertically integrated. And then we also observe a jump at the time of the tax change, and in particular, this jump seems to be higher in vertically integrated gas stations. And this is what we are going to confirm as a spoiler in our main regressions. So we move to the tax effect. I'm going to explain our methodology. We use a generalized difference in difference strategy in which we exploit two things that we have in our model. First of all, the time effect of the increase in the regional fuel tax in the two Spanish states that change the tax effects, so Aragon and Navarra. And we also exploit another key feature describing the theoretical setup, the type of contracts between the retailer and the refiner that defines whether a gas station is vertically integrated or not. Then we have this indicator of being vertically integrated and the indicator of being located in a province or in an state that without the tax change after January 2016. In our, this would be this beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 equation would be the standard difference in difference. And in our regressions, what we do is to successively add different variables in order to control for different things. For example, we include in our specification a weekly fixed effects gamma T, the controlling for the growth of fuel prices common to all gas stations. Then we also include a vector of time-varying control variables that controls for time-varying characteristics that may have an influence on prices. If possible, when we don't have gas station fixed effects, we also include time-invariant variables. And finally, we also include these individual fixed effects, in this case, gas station fixed effects, and also a province times Brent fixed effects controlling for province-specific costs. In this setting, we have two parameters of interest. The first one is beta 2, that measures the causal effect of being located in provinces that increases the regional tax on gas station prices after the tax change. So this is the standard difference in difference coefficient. And in particular, and in addition, we add the beta 3 that captures the additional effect of the tax specifically on vertically integrated gas stations located in the same provinces, which is basically a direct test.
One quick point.
Yep.
What about beta 1? How can beta 1 be there if VI is not time changing?
Of course, beta 1 is not there when we have gas station fixed effects.
Okay, because it's all captured by alpha.
Exactly.
All right. And what as I open the mic for economies of scale, an additional quick point is the coalition, the underdog coalition, which won elections and increased taxes, is part of your identification strategy. You claim that the coalition winning is somewhat exogenous. And secondly, that the tax hike is somewhat exogenous.
Yeah. To be completely honest, we started before knowing that, and by we got some comments and we checked and we realized of this. So this is the complete reality.
Again, for the version you're going to submit, I would spend more time convincing the reader that the two events are exogenous to the to changes in price. We spent too much time in our joint work looking for strategies which support the event that that a political victory is exogenous, as well as tax hikes. One for the tax hikes. One potential suggestion for the tax hikes is what do the additional taxes on fuel replace in the government budget? Was there a shortage in a different tax chapter which induced a hike in taxes? Was it completely political? I think this is the type of argument which you want to put forward. I'll stop here.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm writing this just to have. Perfect. Thank you. So here you have the main results. Basically, we go from the first column in which we only have the basic difference in difference up to the fifth one in which we include all possible controls, and focusing on these columns which reports the most complete specification. We observe an increase of 2% for independent gas stations, while the increase in the final price is increased by an additional 0.7% for vertically integrated gas stations. These estimates represent a pass-through rate of 73.59% for independent gas stations, and for vertically integrated ones, we have an additional pass-through of 26.12, thus reaching almost 100. Basically, that's to give you real numbers. If the tax change was exactly 2.904 cents, our estimates implied an increase of 2.13 cents for independent gas stations, as an additional 0.76 cents for vertically integrated gas stations. And the bottom line here is that we have a positive impact on retail diesel prices, but with a significant greater effect for vertically integrated gas stations. Let me move to these robustness checks of the matching procedure. Here, what we are going to do is to compare pairs of vertically integrated and independent gas stations located in provinces that implemented the tax change, following the strategy described in 2007. We are going to estimate equation 2, in which we are going to make the ratio between the price of vertically integrated and vertically independent gas stations, and we are going to include also a gas station per fixed effect. What we expect here, given that we are claiming that a vertically integrated gas station react more to the tax change, is that beta is positive. We are going to estimate this equation with several procedures. First of all, we are going to use all possible pairs of vertically integrated and independent gas stations, and we are going to have a lot of observations. Then, one may think that different demand patterns, that the vertically integrated and vertically independent gas stations may face different demand patterns. For example, all gas stations in toll highways are controlled by vertically integrated gas stations. As a result, you may be concerned that this difference in gas stations demand may also cause some degree of heterogeneity in the impact of the tax change on prices, thus causing a bias in our estimates. To overcome this potential problem, what we do is to restrict our comparison to pairs of vertically integrated and independent gas stations with similar demand characteristics. And for doing so, we first match gas stations based only on the fuel prices before the tax change. And the idea here is that that gas stations that had similar prices before the tax reform were likely to face similar market demands. And in addition, we are going to match these gas stations based on the same pre-tax reform prices and other demand-related variables. And we are going to do this with, let me go to the, directly to the results. We are going to do this in columns 3, 4, and 5. We are going to use prices and location, prices and competition, and prices plus all. Location means whether you are located in a toll highway or on a highway. Competition means whether you have this ratio of 2 kilometers, you have more or less competitors surrounding by you. And all means that you have all these variables considered in the propensity score procedure. What we do here is to use the so-called nearest neighborhood matching procedure, or basically each vertically integrated gas station. We choose for each vertically integrated gas station, we choose an independent one for which the distance between the propensity score is minimized. Importantly, what we observe is basically the same pattern that we had before, and the results are basically the same, no matter whether we do a non-match sample or whether we match by prices, location, prices of competition, or all. So the bottom line here again is that the tax change affected retail prices to a greater extent in vertically integrated gas stations relative to those that were independent of the oil refiner, even if we consider also some demand factors that may bias our results. In addition, in the paper we provide a lot of robustness checks, and that I'm try to summarize here very quick. First of all, the location of not affected gas stations. So one may think that gas stations that are located in provinces that are not affected by the tax reform but close to the region in which the tax reform happened may have a different price pattern than those that are far away. And this is why we re-estimate our model without gas stations close to the regional borders, and the results are basically unaffected. We also check for the concentration of vertically integrated gas stations in toll highways. So all gas stations in toll highways are vertically integrated, and also in highways. And here we have a different pattern. We have more vertically integrated gas stations in Aragon and Navarra, and more vertically independent gas stations in La Rioja and El País Vasco. So we do the robustness check of dropping all gas stations located in toll highways, all gas stations located in highways, and all gas stations located in both types of roads. And basically we obtain the same results. We also try to study what we call a spillover effect, which is that the distance to the nearest gas station with the opposite vertical structure, and let me try to explain this a bit better. We argue that the price strategy of a gas station that is close to an opposite gas with close to a gas station with an opposite vertical structure may be different than the case of a gas station that is far away from this situation. And our intuition here is that if you are far away, you can increase the price more. And this is exactly what we find here. In this graph, what we do is in the horizontal axis, we are dropping successively gas stations that are located close by 1 kilometer, by 2 kilometers, by 3 kilometers, and so on and so forth until 8. And we stop in 8 because the median average distance is 7.33, if I'm not incorrect. I think I remember the number, sorry. And this is what we observe. Basically, we move the increase is about 0.7% when we don't drop anything in the first case, so in 0. And we obtain a value around 1% when we are in dropping gas stations that are at least 8 kilometers near each other. We also, as I told you, the inclusion of leased dealer gas station does not affect our results, and we basically obtain the same result for leased dealer than for vertically integrated. And finally, the results are also robust to an alternative fuel type, and we do in the paper all the results with the gasoline fuel, and we obtain basically the same results. So we have 10 minutes left, I think, and I'm going to finish with the validity. I'm going to try to give you some intuition of why our results can be considered causal. Basically, in any different difference in difference strategy, what we need is that outcomes in affected and not affected provinces would follow the same time trend in the absence of the tax reform. Of course, this common assumption is not directly testable because the physical location of gas station is obviously not the same in both groups. Nevertheless, we can implement several tests to confirm the validity of our identifying strategy. First of all, we provide a placebo test in which we use Vizcaya, which is the only province with no regional tax change and no border with the affected provinces, as our fake treatment, or our fake affected province. The intuition behind is that the difference between gas station in Vizcaya and in the other not affected provinces are not expected, as none of them introduce a change in the regional trends of the excise fuel judge. And this is exactly what we got in the placebo test. We don't have an effect both for vertically independent and for vertically integrated gas stations. In addition, we can formally test the evolution of pre-trends between affected and not affected groups. And what we do is to estimate again our main specification described in our main equation, but augmented with leads and lags of being located in those provinces with a tax change, separately for vertically integrated and for vertically independent gas stations. What we do here, I'm going to show you the graph, and what we expect here no significant lead if the outcome trends between affected and not affected groups of gas stations are the same. And this is what we get for vertically integrated and for almost all but one leads of vertically independent gas stations. Another reason why we control for anticipatory effects in our main regressions. But we also observe a higher jump for vertically integrated gas station affected by the regional tax rate, which is again consistent with our main estimates. Okay, so let me conclude with a concluding remarks. So as far as we know, we are the first paper studying if difference in the vertical market structure have an heterogeneous impact on consumer price entities. And we do it both theoretically by showing that the tax pass-through is an ambiguously larger under vertical integration than if the retailer and the wholesaler are separate, and empirically by providing robust evidence showing that the tax pass-through is about 35% higher in vertically integrated gas stations. Our findings suggest that policymakers should not only consider the horizontal structure of the market to evaluate the consequences of any fiscal reform, but also the vertical structure, as difference in the degree of integration of the supply chain result in an heterogeneous impact of consumer prices and therefore on the quantity sold and the revenue raised. For instance, in our empirical application, we calculate that if there were only vertically integrated gas stations, these four provinces will rise about 0.26% less revenue from diesel and 0.50% less revenue from gasoline, compared to the case in which we only have independent gas stations. Combining these figures, we estimate a difference in the annual tax revenue for these provinces of about 0.1 million euro. Although one could argue that this difference in revenues is not particularly large, it is important to acknowledge that the tax increase was relatively small, remember, less than 0.03 euros per liter, and consistent with the bulk of the literature, we obtain these figures assuming that fuel demand is fairly unresponsive or inelastic to changes in prices. Therefore, one should expect larger difference in revenues when considering more profound fiscal reforms affecting goods with a higher price elasticity compared to the case of the fuel. And I think I'm done. Thank you very much for your attention. Any question is more than welcome. I don't know if in the chat we have something here.
No, I don't see fights in the chat. I have one quick point on the econometrics, and then I promise I'll shut up. Why don't you at some point you do some propensity score matching to match the to match what? Remind me.
In the propensity score matching, what we do is basically to try to match both types of gas stations with similar demand patterns.
Okay, and which types are they? Independent and vertical integrated?
Integrated
right?
and independent.
Okay, why don't you do diff in diff with the say after matching? So why don't you restrict? There's a very large literature.
I know a bit about. I've been reading a bit of combining both.
It's a possible way forward. And then the second point, a bit more.
I will try this strategy.
A bit more for the selling is that I would be cautious about using policy recommendation wording, because strictly speaking, you don't have you lack a fully structured model which you can use for counterfactual analysis. So I would perhaps soften a little bit the tone, and perhaps if you have resources, why not devoting an additional section of this paper or a different one for a fully fledged structured model to tell us a little bit more about the policy, the full policy implications.
Yeah, well, this is what I told you before, is that we don't have the quantity data.
Okay, which limited.
So we always have this limitation that we cannot study the structural implications of whatever. This is something that we would love to do, believe me. And we have another paper published in Pabeco 1 year ago, and we had more or less the same problem, and we try to overcome this with this quantity data at the month province level, although of course it's not enough to provide the full structural approach.
Any other question? And in the chat? The chat is silent. I have an additional point. Was there a question there? If there's not a question, I have one more about the motivation for the theory which is behind the application. You said you are the first looking at vertical integration in this setting.
In the setting of the tax. So there are many papers studying the double marginalization problem when I'm focusing on prices and on market efficiency, for example, but not on
looking at taxes.
Exactly.
And why is it? Because you're smart, but is there a logical modeling constraint? Just to understand why the literature said, look, this is uncharted territory, we just don't go there.
I don't know exactly, but from the point of view of the empirics, to get the data or such a data is difficult, and maybe there's a link between the lack of data and then the lack of empirics and then the lack of the theory behind.
Direction for the model. Yeah, that makes sense. And a related point is, there is that correct that you also said at some point that there is work on vertical, there's work on horizontal competition or integration, say, but not on vertical.
Exactly.
Okay. And again, the reason is halfway between theory and empirics.
Exactly.
Okay. And I guess looking jointly at vertical and horizontal is quantitatively irrelevant. because either you integrate vertically or horizontally, but those firms who do both, are two in the market. Okay. Yep.
Okay, guys.
Yes.
Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.